Hello, so in this video we are going to be sewing up the little tails from the daisy centered compact square. Let me take a sip of tea. So this is a compact granny square with a daisy center, and there are previous videos just before this in different parts. I'll put into a playlist on how to actually get to this part, but we're going to be sewing it up. I have a selection of darning needles on here. Some have sharp points and some have blunt points. That's a sharp one. I did mainly use the sharp ones, and there was a blunt one. I have a box full of different sizes. These are the ones I'm currently using. I am going to go for a larger one for the outer colors, and I'll use a thinner one when I get right down here to the red. Well, red is actually kind of a very strong purple, and very strong pink. So, sharp pointed needle called a chenille needle. Fold it over the end and thread it through. As far as possible, I try and use a slightly bigger one because the threading through process is much easier. I use the back of the needle, where's the head, for this first step. I'm going to go through the V. Let's see. There we go. So that's 1 double crochet, 2 double crochet, 3 double crochet. I'll go through the V and pull it through. I'll come back from where this yarn started, go down through 2. This looks like on the back of the work. Go down through 2. That closes the V. I do it this way because I sell my granny squares or I give them away, that if the person wishes to sew the granny squares together like this, there are no knots. It's a perfectly even edge, and all the V's are the same count as the V's on that edge there. It is now invisible. You literally cannot see where it is. So I've gone through both sections of the stitch. You really need to learn the anatomy of a stitch so that you can make it as invisible as possible. I unwind my yarn by twisting the darning needle a little bit. I come down to this lower section. There's a little loopy here. I pick up the little loopy, and then I come through. See all these different parts here? I just go through, making sure that it's not going to appear on the other side. I know because I'm feeling it. My finger is literally underneath there. This finger's there. And when I pull this first section through, I'm so careful not to pull that V. Because if you pull him too tight, he's going to close right in and distort the work. And also, when the person comes to sew them up, they won't be able to. But if the person wants to actually add an extra row, depending on how they want to do it, they can, because the work is also even. Now, my favorite thing to do is to work in what I call the worms here. And it is much easier to do when there are 2 rows of a color. Here there's only 1 row of color, so the worms had to be worked into there. I mean, the threads had to be worked into this one worm. So it was much more tricky. I actually do not like to end with just 1 row of color. I did for a lot of them, but this one is much easier to work away with. because you've got 2 worms. You can go up and you can go down and you can go around. It's a lot more fun and a lot more easier. A lot easier. So as you can see, this one is down there. I'll be bringing him up and I'll be working into that worm there and then across. Leaves this worm here free, which means I can go back to that big worm if I so choose. If I don't want to, I can go along to the next one, which I tend to normally do. So I first go along to the next one. And I come down, and the sharp pointed needle, as far as possible, I try and cut into the threads. Literally cut into them as far as possible. I can feel it gripping, making sure it's not coming through on the other side. This finger or that finger acting as a guide. Go down again. You want to go as far as possible with your thread. Each time giving a little twist just to open up all these threads here, because then they will grip in, especially when this gets washed. All those little fibers are going to catch on each other. If it's this is 100% acrylic. If it's cotton, that's not the case. Cotton is very tricky. What I do with cotton is I literally divide these into 3 or 4, depending how many plies there are, and I'll work them in different directions. But that's not necessary with something like this, because the nature of the yarn is that it will grip. So now I'm coming to, I'm busy talking, so do it automatically. So that's where our little knot is, right in the beginning. There he is, sitting snugly between these double crochets. Going to thread the yarn, give it a little twist to open it. There's the little knot. Go underneath the chap next to him, and I'm going to go through the worm and come out on that side. And give it a little tug, and that knot slips away. I do like to anchor it, so I'm going to go back, but not right through the same space. I need to go back through somewhere a little bit different and catch the white yarn with the sharp point and come out there with that little knot, next to the little knot. Really anchor it, because you want this thing to be able, if it's a granny square blanket, you want it to be able to be washed. Look, there's a little knot. You can even come through them again if you want to. That will really grip him, really keep him secure. And now you can go up. Go through all these 6 stitches, this little worm here. What you want is you want it to work in a way without pulling it so tight that it's going to distort your work. But at the same time, you want it to be sitting neatly in place. Undo it a little bit. Work your way up. And we're coming to the top. Go through the worm. Can be tricky. Sometimes you can actually come out like you think you're going through, but you're actually not. You're literally skipping. So just make sure you're going through the worm. And with the finger in the back, making sure you're not peeking out on the other side. Otherwise it'll be a whole stitch and a whole piece of yarn will come through like that. You don't want that either. You can cut them off now, or you can cut them off later. Now a trick is, if you leave them, especially when I'm working colors where it's quite similar, quite near, if I leave my little tails, for instance, my little tails would be like that, and I always try and work my colors from different sides when I add a color. So if I had my little tails like that, then the blue in theory should be on that side and I'll be working it away. But if you leave your little tails, then you can make sure to avoid those worms. For instance, this white here, I worked that worm there, so now I know that there's actually already some work being done inside there. Because sometimes with the white I want to come back and work a bit more. This one is on this side of the worm. This one is on this side of the worm. So this one, because that one over there, he worked through there, I'm going to go through this worm with this one here. And this one I'll go all the way down to that worm there. So that's why sometimes it's handy just to keep your little tail so that you know what you've done. I go up, and I'm not going to pull tight, it will distort the work. Go all the way up. Remember, keep your finger on that side. See, he's peeking through just a tiny bit. So I'll take him out again. I'm going to go through the middle. A little tug, not too much. You don't want to distort it. And that's not where the knot is. The knot is over here. Keep unraveling, try and get it as straight as possible, and go through the worm. This is a little bit of a tight squeeze, so I have to be careful when I pull them through. I don't pull too much or too hard because it will pull everything through. There he is, and go down through like that. And come up again. You think, oh, this is overkill. I just like to work as much as I can until I've got no more tail left. And I'll go back through that worm. This time I'm going to go a little bit higher. And I'll leave them there. And the third one. This takes a long time. It's usually about 10 minutes per square if I have 3 colors. Between 7 and 10 minutes depending on the yarn. So you can imagine with a pile like that. There's the little knot. I want to get the knot as far as possible. I want to get it tucked in. So I'm going to go a little bit underneath, but not underneath that section. Go a little underneath this one here, next to it. Going through the middle of the stitches. You sure it doesn't come through the other side? My finger's telling me. And I pull. The little knot tucked away. Poof, there he is, gone. Just remember, if you're actually making it in this like this way, where the what is called the wrong side is facing up, you don't want the knot to be obvious. I couldn't tell you where he is. Unravel it a bit. And we're going to go through this small worm here. I'm just going to go down. I'm going to go back up, going in where I came out. This big worm is actually where I'm aiming for. There we go. Don't pull too tight, it'll distort it. And then going through the big worm. See, now I wouldn't have had this problem. You see the pink, because he was so close to where I started. That's the problem with this daisy pattern. The beginnings are quite close to each other. Ideally, I would count so that my square, my starter is right on the other side. But I've been doing so many of them like this. That's why it's just so ideal to start a color right on the other side, so you have as many of these big worms free as possible. Now, the last color, I'll be working in the center, so I'm going to nip off these ones now. I use a very, very sharp pair of scissors. And I'm super careful. It's such a shame if you actually cut the wrong way and your whole square will come unraveled. So I just put it onto the fiber and I move a little bit in, trying as hard as possible not to catch the work. Yarn bounces, so if you give it a little bit of a pull and you cut it, it will bounce and disappear. So you don't have to cut it right next to it. Cotton doesn't bounce, so cotton's a bit different. Cut it away, give it a bit of a pull and it bounces right in. So those ones are now gone. There's my little bottle, Enos bottle. And you are left with the center. You have two parts to the center. You have the one that is the ending and you have the one that is the magic circle. I start with the magic circle because I want to close it properly. There it's closed properly. You cannot close it properly if you start with this one because he will be biting into all the fibers and you won't be able to close it magic circle. Magic circle is closed. Now this is a large one. For this job, I prefer to use a smaller one. It's a bit trickier to darn, but he can get into the tiny spaces that are created by the half double crochet. Unravel it a bit. Make sure I'm working in the correct direction. You really have to be sure you're working in the correct direction, otherwise you basically will be undoing your magic circle. So it comes from there, which means I'll be working clockwise. And giving a good tug each time. This is a sharp pointed darning needle and it's going to bite into all those fibers. Making sure it's unraveled. And I literally go round and round and round. You can see where the beginning is. Coming up to the beginning, two indications, tail, as well as there's a little space. You're going to try and close that little space. And if this is going to be the right side of the work, you want it to be super neat. So I've gone around my magic circle. Now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going up in between those white clusters. And now I'm going to use the base of the white clusters to work this tail. At least 3 if possible. And I will not cut him. I need to know where he is. I'm very happy with that. I'm going to the other one. This is where the work ended. Now remember, when we did that little worm, we made that initial V, which can sometimes become a bit baggy. So I'm going to give him a little tug. Make sure that little initial V is not baggy. Unravel. And if you look at this pattern all the way around, there's a ridge. I'm just going to be working into that ridge. And that's why I said this little tiny needle is so handy. You can buy a set of them. They come in a little packet, all the different sizes. This is probably a size 24 for less than £2. Okay. The smaller the needle, the higher the number. Back to where I started. This guy, he's come through these 3. So this one, I'm just going to feed up to there. And I'll go through those 3. If you know you're not turning the work over, you can just go around in here, but you want to go as far as possible. You want to do as much as possible, because if that magic circle comes loose, or if this one comes loose, your whole square is destroyed. And if it's inside a blanket, it can be absolutely devastating. Your whole daisy will come undone. So I always say overkill. Rather do too much than too little. And you come down into the center again, because that's where I like to cut the thread. There we go. And this one as well. Yes, it takes a long time, but it really is nice when the job is done properly. And there we go. You can cut them now, or you can make a whole pile of them, and then you can cut. Give a little tug, cut, you can pull, and it disappears. Because remember, when the person is going to wash and block them, whoever's going to be making the square, they are going to be tugging the work, because they're going to want to block it. There we go. So I'm very, very happy with that. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and happy crocheting. Bye for now.